on chapters 8 and 9, Proverbs 8 and 9. That's where we'll be going over tonight. Proverbs 8 and 9, okay? I don't see anybody. Last chance. All right. After we get through with chapter 9, we'll be going into looking at some of the Proverbs on a few different subjects. The first one is out there, and you can pick it up if you want to. It's also been posted on our website if you'd rather have it as a PDF version. And that will be on parents and children. And so we'll look at that. I'm trying to get these lessons, the added ones on different subjects, where we pool together some of the Proverbs that were written about these subjects, look at those as kind of a group. I'm going to try to do that through the time of March. And then come April, we'll start in this evening class, on Wednesday evening class, we'll start the minor prophets. If that's agreeable to everybody, we're going to talk about that among the elders and everything else in a meeting pretty soon. But that's probably where we're headed. If you've got any suggestions, though, of a different direction, you might want to get a hold of me or one of the elders or make some suggestion there. Anything else before we begin? Not, we'll go, Michael, if you'll lead us in the word of prayer, we'll begin.
Our Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for this opportunity to study your word. We pray that you'll be with each and every one of us as students to help us concentrate on these things and meditate on these things that you have set before us in your word. And pray that you will also be with those that are unable to be here, whether they're sick or traveling. And please go with us as we enter this study, and we can take something and from it and apply it to our lives, and also to go out into the world and teach others. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
All right. As we've looked at chapter 8 here for a while, what trait or virtue, I guess you might say, is personified in chapter 8? Is the one that's the speaker? Wisdom, all right. Wisdom is personified, saying what she is like and all of these things. We looked at this as the last paragraph we completed. I think it was 3 weeks ago that was our last class in this. Let's just read back and get the sense of it before going into the next paragraph where we left off. It says, when he prepared the heavens, speaking of God, when he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he established the clouds above, when he strengthened the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limits, so that the waters would not transgress his command. When he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him as a master craftsman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in an inhabited world, or in his inhabited world, and my delight was with the sons of men. The point is being made there that wisdom was a part of the way that God created. God possessed this wisdom. And wisdom is looked at as a she, as we had pointed out, because it's feminine. The noun wisdom in the Hebrew language is feminine. Talks about the fact that wisdom was a part of that creation. Why would that be pointed out, that wisdom was a part of that creation? What does that sound like? Anything in the New Testament reminds you of something like that? Okay, Jesus and the Word from John 1. What else? Romans chapter 1. What did Paul tell those of the Gentiles? The power and divinity of God is clearly seen through what? The things that are made, the created things. And so the point is that this shows by the design or order of this creation, it's obvious that this wasn't just put together by some man. It had the power and the wisdom, the insight to have that intricate type of balance. In Chapter 8 then going on in verse 32. Now therefore listen to me, my children, for blessed are those who keep my ways. Hear instruction and be wise, and do not disdain it. Blessed is the man who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting at the post of my doors. For whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. But he who sins against me wrongs his own soul. All those who hate me love death. Whereas in the previous paragraph, you had seen that God possessed this ability of knowledge, or this trait of knowledge, or wisdom, pardon me. That there was an ample manifestation of that. Now who's being told they need to possess it? The people who are wise, those who are of God, that they need to possess this, that God had always been in possession of. When they do, where's it going to lead them? When they keep my ways, they hear instruction and are wise, do not disdain it, then what happens in the end? The blessings are there to them, right? What happens if they don't? Last verse. Death. In what sense? Okay, there's one thing. If I'm not wise in a spiritual sense, then I'm not one who's doing what is the will of God. There will be a spiritual death. Is that all? Many times, what is it going to cause? It's going to cost my life. When we do things the way that God says, our life isn't ended abruptly by a mistake or a wrong. Now, it may be ended because we're persecuted or brought to death as Jesus was. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in the sense of, as a result of doing this, some wrong has come back upon me and cost me my life. It was really my own doing. That's not what happens with the things of right. But folly and those things after the way of Satan can many times cost people their lives, as well as that which has to do with their spiritual life, the death that comes from being separated from God. And so we need to keep that need for wisdom ever before us. Blessed is the man, he says. Here's this one of, again, same thing that you read in like Matthew chapter 5. The sense of contented or a well-being is there of who? Of the man who listens to me, listens to wisdom, watching daily at my gates, waiting at the post of my doors. What does that mean? We wouldn't say things exactly that way, but get that picture in your mind. Here's somebody who's out there beside the house or whatever of wisdom. What's he doing there?
It reminds me of Deuteronomy chapter 6.
Okay.
Always on watch, always waiting, rising up, going down.
Okay.
At all times I'm thinking about wisdom and who God is.
All right. And there we're talking to the idea of relating that to our children or in the household. Here, you have somebody that's waiting on it for themselves. When you want to see someone, what do? You go out and wait. I remember when Leslie and I were in college, and she'd be in the dorm, I'd wait outside. I knew she was coming out sooner or later. She had to, so I'd wait there until she came out, and then we'd be able to go and eat together or whatever. But you have that sense of you want something there. You want this togetherness. You want this association. And that's what's being pictured as the wise person who's waiting for wisdom to come out. And whoever finds me finds life and what? Obtains favor from the Lord. Path of wisdom always leads to the path of God. That's always so. There's no folly that is of God. Therefore, folly doesn't lead to him. Wisdom leads in that direction. All right. Anybody got anything there? There we have wisdom personified. She's speaking out about the quality of wisdom, the need for it, the good that comes. And now what happens is wisdom is still personified, but we go back and forth. There's going to be something said about wisdom, by an outside, if you will, and then wisdom is going to comment again several times in chapter 9. So let's look first 3 verses there, and we'll go on down through verse 6, but in the first 3 verses there is this interlude of a descriptiveness about wisdom. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her meat. She has mixed her wine. She has also furnished her table. She has sent out her maidens. She cries out from the highest places of the city. Whoever is simple, let him turn and hear. As for him who lacks understanding, she says to him, come eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Forsake foolishness and live, and go in the way of understanding. All right. Wisdom has built her house. Why would that be said that way? She's built her house. Okay. What comes with the quality of wisdom is that there's something that's well grounded. It's steady. It's having that which is going to be solid in its effect. She's built her house. She's hewn out what? All right. When we talk about building a house, what do we talk about first? You do what, Foster? All right. You're going to lay that concrete, that foundation. Then what comes? You do all of this framing that's there. Wasn't the way it happened in New Testament times. Many times, especially in Jerusalem and in areas around there, you had a rock bed. In other words, there was this mountainous land. Now, what would you do if you were going to build a house that had total solidity about it? Many times what they would do is they would hew out the house out of the rock. In other words, here's rock, and they go into it, and what do they leave? They leave the 7 pillars. 7 is always a completeness number, a perfection number, and so there's the idea here that it's perfectly got this pillar remaining. You go into some of the things of Petra, you look there and other places, and you'll notice that same thing. That the houses or the buildings are hewn out of a rock. I think that's the point being made here. That goes to extra solidity. Now, that's not the way most of it was done in Jerusalem, because in most of the cases in Jerusalem, you had those blocks. But you would have some places that were seen as especially extravagant or especially lavish, that would have people who were wealthy having built in. You would go into that rock. You would leave the kind of pillars that are there to satisfy that that kind of a strength to keep that rock from all falling down. But what you had is something that was in that immovability of the rock. It also was one that was very much cool in an arid and hot part of the land. This was something that would be more in that way of something that was a luxury of that kind. I think that's the point that's being made here. When you looked at those kind of houses, they were seen as the houses of extreme wealth. Well, why would that be so with wisdom having a house like that? Because what is it? It's very valuable. And that's the point that's being made. Now, here she is living in this kind of house. She has slaughtered her meat. Not going to some place of a market, even in that time, that's what the norm was done, that you had a market from there. Here's somebody who owns this. And now all that has to happen for her to get something to eat for herself and her guests is to go out into the fields, slaughter it, and it's available right there. Now, what else has she done? She's mixed her wine. She's also furnished her table. The term of mixed wine could be one of 2 things. In New Testament times, you always had what was called oinos, or the wine, was made of a mixture of whatever of the grapes that there was plus water. That would be even so if you took fresh grapes and that squeeze. They would usually cut that with water to some degree. It would be especially so if you boiled down the pulp of the grape, evaporated off the water, then you'd reconstitute it like that. That was also called oinos. You'd also do it if it was something that was taken out of the skins, something that maybe had fermented to some level. Even at that level, is probably about 6% as a max in that area. But they would always take that and mix that with at least 3 or 4 parts water to 1 part wine, and they would call that oinos. Now, we're back in Hebrew time. Sometimes that was done as well there. Especially if you had something that was more of the fermented kind. But I don't think that's what's being referred to here. I think what's being referred to is that it was mingled or mixed in the sense of herbs that were given in, or a special flavoring that was there. Why? Because that was even seen as higher class, if you will. That was seen as a luxury. Kind of a way of doing that, of having these herbs or infused with some fruits or something like that. You would have this kind of thing. That's the idea of when you had this real extravagance going on. Now, she's put that there. She sent out her maidens. She cries out from the highest places of the city. And what's she doing? All right. Do what? All right. She's inviting people in. She's telling them what she's going to have. With all of this, the point is she's making that opening. Is wisdom seen as that which is hidden and unattainable? No. It's seen as something that has great value. That's true. But it's a great value that is there, but open to all and attainable there. Look at the statement she makes here in verses 4 through 6. Whoever is simple, in other words, without that wisdom, let him turn in here. As for him who lacks understanding, she says to him, come, eat my bread and drink the wine I have mixed. Forsake foolishness and live, and go in the way of understanding. That's wisdom talking. What was that immoral woman talking like that we looked at the last few times? What was her invitation? Why were they coming into her house? Was it for this? All right. That physical pleasure, the meeting of some lust that was there, they were doing what would be hidden, what nobody would know. All of those things were there. It was a subterfuge. She was asking them in under false pretenses, is the idea of here's what you'll receive. But the fact of it was, what did they get in the end? Death. That's what would happen to them in the end. The way that they came out, they'll not go again, is the idea that's pointed out repeatedly in the Proverbs. Yet here, forsake foolishness and live. Come and have true life by wisdom. And go in the way of understanding. In other words, if you attain that wisdom, now how are you going to be able to live your life? How are you going to live it if you obtain that wisdom? Do what? All right, with understanding. In other words, you'll be able to make that application. You'll see what that wisdom is, and you'll then be able to apply that in day-to-day life. That's the idea. I think the point is being made, and it isn't hard to see it. It's hard to miss it, I guess you would say, of seeing the difference, the parallel between the immoral woman, the foreign woman, whatever you want to talk about her, the seductress, and then wisdom in her speech. The last few chapters, we've seen that immoral woman, that seductress speaking. Now here you have wisdom having spoken in chapter 8, and then again making some points of comments here in chapter 9 as well. Anybody else got anything there? Anything at all? All right. Let's look at verse 7. He who corrects a scoffer gets shame for himself. He who rebukes a wicked man only harms himself. Do not correct a scoffer, lest he hate you. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. Teach a just man, and he will increase in learning. Okay. If you correct a scoffer, he says, you only get shame for yourself. Does that mean you're not supposed to correct a scoffer? Someone's an unbeliever, are you supposed to just let him go on and be an unbeliever? No, we know better than that, so what's the point?
They're not going to appreciate it.
Okay. Here you've got a scoffer, especially in the sense of this word from the Hebrew. It has the idea not of only somebody who makes fun of something in a kind of a quick repartee or something that you're saying. This is someone who is determined to go a different path. That's determined to go against what you say. That's the idea of a scoffer, that he's fully entrenched in that way of being a scoffer. Here is that person. Now, if you go and you try to correct him, what are you going to do? You're going to only harm yourself. Why? Why would you only harm yourself if you tried to correct that scoffer?
Well, they don't want to hear instruction in the first place.
Okay.
So, you may get slapped around pretty good.
Okay. Now, what if that person who had tended toward being a scoffer, they ask us, I'm wondering about this that I've done. Now what I do? I'm going to try to give them wisdom. I'm going to try to help in that case. I heard an old preacher one time when I was a young man. I thought he was kind of over-exaggerating the deal a little until I got older. And that was, I don't tend to go and give a great deal of advice to somebody who didn't ask me. And I learned as I was a little older that that's a pretty smart thing to do. If someone is going to want the advice, if they're going to want that kind of a correction specifically in that sort of way, I'm not talking about just pointing out in a general way some good things in a talk or a class or whatever else. That's not my point. But a specific rebuke, that's a little bit different point. You've got to be ready to hear that before it'll be heard. Go ahead.
Well, Psalms 1 tells us that a fool despises instruction. So if we're the one trying to give them that wisdom who's going to despise us, that's the losing that you're talking about.
That's correct. That's the point that's there when they're determined and set in this sort of a path. And that's what you see as you go through here. He rebukes a wicked man. In other words, one steeped in that wickedness or remaining in that. What happens then? You only harm yourself. Why? You ever heard a statement that you might as well beat your head against a wall? There's the point. The idea, if they're not ready to hear that, then that sort of a sense is you're only going to do yourself some harm by that. They're not going to listen. Go ahead.
Jesus gave us this same idea in Matthew 7:6. It says, do not give what is holy to the dog or cast pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you in pieces.
That's right. Later on in the book of Proverbs, you have two verses. Answer not a fool according to his folly. The next verse, answer a fool according to his folly. Well, which one is right? Both of them. Depends on the situation. Are they ready to hear that? And that's exactly, as Steve pointed out, what Jesus was saying in Matthew chapter 7. Do not correct a scoffer, lest what? All right. When someone is not ready to hear, number one, here's that correcting a scoffer, you get shamed to yourself. In other words, sooner or later, you're going to enter into sounding like him if you're trying to answer. Then what else? Do not correct a scoffer lest he... All right, that's looking at it from the other sense. He's not going to listen. You're even going to enrage him some more. So now, if he mellows out and wants to listen later, what's your effect at this point? Probably not going to have the opportunity you would have had if you would have just kept quiet before because they weren't ready to hear. Is that always easy to spot the difference between the two of those? No. That's why wisdom is gained over time. It's not something you can get just like that. There's going to have to be circumstances, and the more you see those circumstances through life, the more you recognize, here's where this one applies, here's where this one applies. Wisdom is seeing the difference between those situations. Go ahead.
You see this, we can apply this nowadays a lot on social media. This, correcting a scoffer, let's see, hey, you're wasting your time, it's just a futile thing. Now, if you want to maybe go to them later, as a person, one-on-one, you're going to have more opportunity
Right.
to do something there in a public fashion on a social media. It's a waste of time.
I think most of you know I hadn't been on for a couple of years, I guess, and that's pretty much the reason why. I got tired of the kind of arguments that were online there and the foolishness that was involved in it, and said, no, forget that. I got a better thing to do with my time. Whether you made that decision or not doesn't matter to me. You've got your own to do, but that kind of a thing is one that you, over time, are going to recognize. Here's some differences between the two. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love you. If you rebuked a wise man because he showed some lack of wisdom in a kind of a momentary way, he's showing himself to give himself to wisdom. That's why he's called a wise man. But he made a mistake. Now, what's that guy usually going to do when you correct that? All right, he's going to usually appreciate that and recognize that was helpful in coming to that point. When there's a rebuke that is there of truth, and we undoubtedly point out the truth, that's not always going to convince somebody. But it will convince them ultimately if they were honest and good. Jesus talked about the need for an honest and good heart that hears the truth. The seed is only going to be that which flourishes in that kind of soil. And so what happens is when you have someone who is desiring that correction, someone who wants to do what is right, that'll be the end of it. Some of the people that are closest to me in my life as I got older are ones who gave me some of the best criticism I ever had as I was growing up and learning somewhat. I usually call one of them about once every month or so that's down in the Dallas area that I remember as friends of my mom and dad. And he was just extremely good to me and teaching some ways that I thought were very helpful. Some men who've helped me in times of preaching as well, the same way. That's going to be there. You're going to love them because they had a care for your soul and they knew they were risking something by coming to you. Give instruction to a wise man and what? He'll be still wiser. Why?
Well, a true wise man knows that he can learn something from everybody, and that he's not the smartest in every subject or everything, and that it may be what not to do, but he's learned, you can learn something from everybody.
That's what Scott's learned from me in carpentry, what not to do.
On the same lines of what Scott's saying, 100% of wisdom is not obtainable. So any bits of wisdom that we can accumulate as we go on, no matter how old we get, no matter how wise we get, there's always more to have.
Yeah, that's right. And so that point being made, that will be something that will gain in that way. Teach a just man, and he will increase in learning. In other words, he'll learn and he'll be able to impart that as well. Anybody else there? Go to verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years of life will be added to you. If you are wise for yourself. And if you scoff, you will bear it alone. I want to start out with that first in verse 10 there, the statement. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Does that remind you of something in this book? Remind you of anything? Anybody? Does that sound familiar? Go back to chapter 1. Chapter 1 and verse 7, the fear of Jehovah is the beginning of knowledge, but the foolish despise wisdom and instruction. He goes on from there to repeat this idea of searching after wisdom from one that is like a father. You go back up above that in verses 2 through 4 when he talks about that these proverbs are given to know wisdom and instruction, to discern words of understanding, to receive instruction of wise dealing, in righteousness and justice and equity, and to give prudence to the simple, and the young man knowledge and discretion. Does that sound a lot like what we're reading here? What's he doing? Point of what he's doing is he started out this section. We're coming toward the end of this first section. This part written by Solomon dealing with wisdom and the nature of it. We're coming to an end of that at chapter 9. So, as he's coming to the end of this, what's he doing? Going back and picking up the beginning to show how this is all tied together. Through the whole thing, what has he done? He's talked about the fear of the Lord or the fear of Jehovah, just like he did back there in chapter 1. And how it is that that leads to a wisdom and an understanding and a way of life that is in accord with God's will. So he's pulling those things together in that sort of way. And he says, for by me, wisdom speaking again here, she says, for by me your days will be what? Versus what? Your days will be multiplied by wisdom. What will they be without the wisdom? Short. You'll be brought to death is the idea that's there. And years of life will be added to you. That isn't talking about length of years in your lifetime. That's not the point. This is an idiom from the Hebrew. It has to do with a worthwhile kind of a life. When they talk about years of life will be added, not years to your life, but years of life. In other words, in the years that you have, what will you have? You will have those full of life. Full of things that are of a profitable way. You'll have a worthy kind of a life that's there, is the point that's being made. This isn't what David is saying, for instance, over in the Psalms when he talks about years added to life, that is by doing right. This is talking about that quality of life. Your life will be enriched with life that is life indeed, as the book of James puts it. These kind of things are what are being looked at. If you're wise, who are you going to benefit? Yourself. That'll be something for yourself. If you scoff, who are you going to hurt? Yourself. And so this is the point. Solomon's bringing this. It's your choice. You decide which you're going to do. But the better way is the way of life, the way of wisdom. All right, verse 13. A foolish woman is clamorous. She is simple and knows nothing. For she sits at the door of her house on the seat by the highest place in the city to call to those who pass by, who go straight on their way. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And as for him who lacks understanding, she says to him, Stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of hell. Who's this talking about again? All right, this same one, whatever you want to call her, the seductress, the woman who is dressed in the attire of a harlot, the seductress, whatever your term there, that's her speaking again. Who's she speaking to? Who's going to listen to her? The simple, the foolish in the end, right? She's counting on them. Wise man won't listen to that because he's going to learn from this that is there, and he's not going to go into her way. And what does she say? Stolen water is sweet. In other words, if you take what's not yours, it'll be better. Really? What kind of person has that idea? What have you valued if you would make that kind of a statement and believe it? Your value is in stealing, taking what's not. In other words, that selfishness is what's behind all of that, isn't it? Okay. If I'm trying to act in a way that's of wisdom and to impart wisdom and to help people, will I be saying, hey, stolen water is better than stuff you got on your own? No. I'm going, no better than that, because that's not going to be the way that is of wisdom in that sense. All right, anybody else got a comment there? All right. There's one thing I wanted to touch. Yeah, here. He who does not know that the dead are, but he does not know that the dead are there, this man that she's inviting in, that her guests are in the depths of hell. When you look at that term that is being pointed out there, that her guests are in the depth of hell, you have again that word Sheol, which is death. Now, that can be sometimes applied in the Old Testament to what we may say is the Hadean realm, something that is like that, or it can just be the state of death or a dead person. It can mean any of those. In the Hebrew language, the word Sheol. It's not the word that would be there of a Gehenna, like in the New Testament, eternal hell. There is no word for that in the Old Testament, really. It has to be something that's put together in a way of a phrase, but there's no word specifically for that out of the Hebrew language. Now, when she's talking about the idea, or when it's pointed out that her guests are in the depths of hell, it's obviously not talking about just dead. Why does it use the term depths of hell or death? Sheol.
They're lost. They're spiritually lost.
Okay. The worst of death. I mean, if you think about that in the sense of the most ignominious, the most horrible, there's the term that is being described. In other words, it isn't just this one died a normal death. They died an ignominious, horrible death. Why? Because it was their own fault, because of their stupidity, their folly. And so that's the point that's being made here. Don't end up like that. Be one who has the wisdom to recognize what the best way of life is. All right. Got that. I almost forgot it. Anybody else? Okay. Let's look at these questions here. Number one, while we must seek wisdom, is she hard to find? Not hard to find, but what do we have to have according to that verse? How are we to seek in chapter 8, verse 17? Diligently. So there is effort that is there. It's not an effort where it's hard to find, but it's an effort that is there for us nonetheless. God makes it apparent, but it's not apparent to us in some sort of a way that it just comes on us. We've got to seek after that kind of thing. What does it mean to understand prudence in chapter 8 and verse 5? What does it mean? To understand prudence. Okay. Understand is that idea of a discerning. The idea of prudence. What's prudence? All right, a good judgment that is there. Something that has to do with a sense of propriety, of understand what is appropriate given a situation. And so in one thing that might be appropriate somewhere else, you wouldn't want to have being done in a different situation. It'd be totally out of place. And so here's the sense of recognize when these are involved, just like what we've talked about with regard to the idea of a correction of somebody who's a scoffer, said in that, versus someone who's seeking to do what's right. Number 4, what kind of riches does wisdom provide for her hearers? All right, enduring riches, riches that are far greater than what you can get that are of a physical nature, certainly is something that's pointed out repeatedly in this book. All right, in 8:22-31, what 2 things concerning wisdom cause you to want to listen to her commands? What 2 things? I'll give you, this might be a little bit difficult getting it out of the New King James. Let me read the American Standard. Jehovah possesses me, speaking of wisdom, possesses me, in the beginning of his ways, before his works of old. I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning, before the earth was. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there was no fountain abounding with water. Before the mountains were settled, before the hill was I brought forth, while as yet he had not made the earth and the fields. Verse 31. As he goes on there, while he had not yet made the earth and the fields, nor the beginning of the dust of the world. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he set a circle upon the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when the fountains of the deep became strong, when he gave to the sea its bound, that the waters should not transgress his commandments, when he marked out the foundations of the earth. Then I was by him as a master workman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in his habitable earth, and my delight was with the sons of men. What's the point that he's making?
Wisdom is everlasting.
Okay. What 2 things concerning wisdom cause you to want to listen to her command? It's everlasting. Who's it from? From God, number 1. Number 2, is there a way that I know that his wisdom worked? Sure, you look at what he made, all of the things that he did. The expectation is that if he's wise and he's manifesting his wisdom by what he's created, then surely I'd want to listen to his wisdom. That he knows better than anyone else. That's the sense of it. That's what you have repeatedly being brought out in Old Testament and New. All we need to do is look at the creation. If I deny the creation was by the power of God, then I deny the whole undersetting of the Bible. But if I recognize that power came from God, then that power, that word that was manifest, it showed God's ability, his wisdom in that, his knowledge of it, his absolute power to be able to bring it about. So the fact that it's from God and the fact that God's ways work, those are 2 things that make me want to recognize, okay, what did he say about wisdom on some other matter? Because he must. He's very clearly proven his wisdom. So I want to listen to it. Anybody else got anything there? All right. We've, is that the first one? Okay, that's the first one. On this one on number 9, in Proverbs 9, 1-6, to what degree has wisdom prepared so that she might help the simple? Do what?
Completely.
Okay, completely. In every way, she can be seen in an absolute way. That point is very obvious as you look at it. Now, the principle found in chapter... No, I don't want that one. That's not the one I want. Here it is. What is the meaning of, if you are wise for thyself? Wisdom benefits who? The person who has it. So if I gain wisdom, I'm helping myself. That's to my benefit that I'm doing those things. All right, last one. Looking back, what things stand out concerning wisdom in chapters 1 through 9? It's one I always do with Filipino preacher training. What'd you learn yesterday? What have you learned over the first 9 chapters here of this?
Even a wise man can become wiser.
Okay.
And even our morals can become strengthened. And we should never get to the point where we don't, even if we're wise, we don't need to not receive wisdom from someone else that's wise.
Okay. What else?
You have to have the fear of God to gain it.
For that to begin along.
Fear's not bad.
That's right. Go ahead, Marie.
Well, I put down three things. One thing, if I let it, it will protect me, it will guide me correctly, and it will lead me to heaven if I.
Okay. Good.
Folly could be just around the corner, and we need to be mindful and aware that
All right.
we
We could
could fall into
fall into that, certainly. I saw another hand somewhere here. All right. Well, remember to pick up the ones on parents and children on your way out, or pick it up on the website. Download that. We'll ask James Buckley, if he will, to lead us in a closing word of prayer.